All right, Alexander, let's get into this story, and it's a big one. It has to do with Israel and what's happening near Gaza. And I'm just going to read you the title from Zero Hedge. It says, Israel orders massive reinforcement of reserve troops to quell riots, ground forces amass near Gaza. It looks like we're heading towards, instead of things calming down, it looks like we're heading towards some sort of ground offensive. I don't know. I mean, once again, I'm seeing Twitter videos. We're getting headlines like the one that I just read. And instead of things being dialed down, they're being dialed up. So this is where we are right now with what's going on. Reuters is detailing this. Actually, just let me read you what Reuters says as well. Israeli troops massed at Gaza's border on Thursday, and Palestinian militants pounded Israel with rockets in intense hostilities that have caused international concern and touched off clashes between Jews and Arabs in Israel. Once again, that is from Reuters. Also from Reuters, 85 Gazans killed, including 17 children. 7 Israelis have died, including a 5-year-old boy, with dozens injured from inbound rockets. So that's the situation right now. I don't know if you want to talk about the geopolitical implications here. I kind of asked myself, how did we get to this point where just maybe a month ago we weren't talking about this, and now here we are, which I guess shows how quickly things are moving in a very bad direction geopolitically. So I don't know if you want to add some context as well with this story.
I think this is absolutely the key to this, because obviously the situation seemed to be calmer. One has to always be careful because, of course, the whole story of this conflict is of periods of calm followed by periods of, escalation and tension and violence and conflict. And this has been a consistent pattern. But I don't think it's a coincidence that these things are happening now, because two things are taking place at the same time, one and the same time. Well, actually, three things. The first is that there's a political vacuum in Israel itself. Netanyahu is prime minister at the moment, but he's finding it difficult to form a government. The Israeli president has asked another political leader to try and form a government in his place. It could be that we're seeing the end of the long reign of Netanyahu as Israel's leader, and that has created an atmosphere of uncertainty. But far more important than that, it seems to me, again, is the sense that the really most important country in the Middle East, or at least the country that has always up to now played the essential role of controlling situations in the Middle East, which is the United States, is at the moment led by a very weak and chaotic administration. We've talked about this many times. It isn't focused on the Middle East in any great extent. For the first time, we see within the Democratic Party a wing of the Democratic Party that's not only hostile to involvement in the Middle East, but which is increasingly critical of Israel as well. And we see people in Congress from that wing, the left wing of the Democratic Party, which is the ascendant, they're talking. And that comes against a general sense that is, I think, growing in the region, that the United States is in retreat, that it is withdrawing from the Middle East. It's pulling out of Afghanistan, as we've discussed. I happen to agree with that decision, but it's doing that. It's negotiating with Iran to re-enter the JCPOA, and it is looking increasingly as if it's going to agree to do so on Iran's terms. It's increasingly looking as if eventually US troops are going to be pulled out of Iraq, probably, perhaps, eventually even Syria, because if you pull them out of Iraq, the Syrian intervention doesn't look very viable. At the same time, you have other forces within the administration that seek to escalate things in the Middle East. So you get this extraordinary sense of uncertainty, this extraordinary sense of a power vacuum. The administration has announced no plan for the conflict in the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli, Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's brought no new ideas to the table. It hasn't engaged in it. President Biden has, I think, only spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu once. Secretary Blinken shows no interest in the topic at all. And in this atmosphere of retreat and drift and confusion and competing factions within the administration, you see how quickly things can unravel. And another administration, you'd have the president on the phone, you'd have the secretary of state on the phone, you'd have top US officials going to Jerusalem, talking to all the sides, trying to find some way of, as you said, dialing the thing down. Nothing like that is happening this time, nor is it going to happen, because it seems to me that this administration isn't at the moment capable of that kind of structured approach to foreign policy. It hasn't set goals, it hasn't set itself objectives, it has no real idea or even interest in what to do.
So it sounds like everything is breaking down, and I'm trying to think to myself, where is this all going to lead? We have a lot of vacuums. We have a vacuum in Israel. We have a vacuum in the world. We have a vacuum in the United States. In the White House, there's a vacuum. There's no one around. I mean, you can't say the U.S.'s track record in the Middle East was anywhere near acceptable. I'm not even going to say the word good.
No.
Acceptable. It was terrible. I mean, you named the conflicts: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. It goes on and on and on. Okay, we've discussed that at length on this channel, all the conflicts, and as well as the U.S.'s relation with Israel as well, and vis-a-vis Palestinians, the Gaza Strip. Everything has been historically a mess, but the U.S. was kind of the glue that was holding this shaky structure together, and now it's just collapsed. And I'm just trying to, I guess my question to you is this the temporary pains of a restructured global system, or is this going to lead to just all-out chaos and war?
I'm afraid in the Middle East, I very much worry it will be the second. And I say straightforwardly why. You are absolutely right. The United States' record in the Middle East, especially over the last 20 years, has been terrible. I mean, it's destabilized Iraq. It's in fact essentially destroyed Iraq. Iraq is hardly a functional state anymore. Whatever you may have think of the previous regime in Iraq, Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq, I always thought he was a brutal dictator. But the fact of the matter is he held things together. That's gone, and nothing that's replaced him has looked remotely functional. Syria has been smashed. It's gradually, step by step, piecing itself together, but it's going to take a very, very long time. And I don't really see stability in any part of the Middle East as a result of what the United States did there. Now, that is bad. That is very, very bad. But as you rightly said, the mere fact that the United States was present acted as a kind of glue. It was a restraining force. It meant that various countries, various groups, various militias were always under some sort of check because the United States was there and they had to bargain and relate themselves to that fact. The problem is that if the United States pulls out now, which I think it is gradually going to do, I mean, there are the neocons who are pulling it in one direction, but I think the overwhelming sense now is that it is gradually pulling out of the Middle East. What it has done is that by smashing all the states, if you like, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, whatever, Egypt even to a great extent, it has left a desert, a vacuum, which it's very difficult to see how anybody's going to fill. Given how violent this region potentially is and how conflict prone it is, smashing the states opens up the way for greater chaos. And I think we're seeing the first indications of this in Israel itself. I mean, it's difficult to know how this particular episode is going to work out. I mean, the Israelis will contain it. They will control it. They have in the past. But in a situation where the whole Middle East is starting to tumble downwards, which I suspect is what we're going to see, it's difficult to imagine how this can stop and how it won't recur. And it begs the question, by the way, of what in that case a state like Israel will do.
Yeah, well, in these situations, usually it'll be the poorest that will suffer the most. So in this case, I would imagine it would be the Palestinians that will suffer the most as everything just gets turned upside down and uprooted. Who are going to be the strong states that jump in? I mean, Iran, obviously, you could take a look at Turkey. Maybe, I mean, are they going to start selling weapons in the Middle East? Egypt, you mentioned Egypt. Is Egypt going to start asserting its power there? Okay, obviously Israel, like you said, it's going to carve out its position and contain it. Is China going to jump in? Is Russia going to sell arms and just flood the region with arms and weapons? I mean, can you think of who's going to want to just jump into this vacuum? Because, you know, when you have a vacuum, it's going to get filled, I don't know, by one state, 10 states, terrorists. I mean, I don't know who. Yeah. What's going to happen here?
It is very difficult to imagine any one of those countries filling the space left by the United States. China isn't interested in the Middle East. I've been checking the Chinese media. They're barely reporting these events in Israel at all. I mean, it's just too remote from them. So they're not interested in it. And they would want to keep clear. Russia, realistically, doesn't have the power. I mean, it doesn't have the ability to control the Middle East in the way that the United States did. I mean, we've talked a lot about Russia. We've talked about its skillful diplomacy, its effective armed forces, its technology, and all the rest. But it is not a substitute for the United States. And besides, Russian experiences in the Middle East have been such that they'll not want to get too deeply involved. Iran is very interested in the Middle East, but it is not anywhere near strong enough to dominate it. The same is true of Turkey. So I'm afraid that what you're going to have is in the central Middle East a spiral downward, and you're going to have the big powers on the periphery, Turkey, Iran, Egypt, perhaps Saudi Arabia, or whatever regime there is in Saudi Arabia. They'll all be engaged in a frantic struggle for influence, operating various militias, backing various groups, backing various Palestinian groups. Bear in mind, for example, someone like Erdogan backs groups like Hamas in Gaza. I mean, whereas Egypt is probably more attracted to supporting the Palestinian Authority. And these two groups are also in adversarial relationship with each other, just as they are with Israel. And you're going to see all of these groups in conflict with each other, and of course Israel too. Israel is also going to be a major player. So we're going to see, I think, a general spiral down. And as you rightly say, it is the poor and the weak who are going to suffer. And the Europeans are completely nowhere in this picture. And of course, they're going to suffer the consequences in the form of greater refugee flows.
Yeah, I didn't even mention Europe because they're useless. But what about some of the smaller countries to close it out? Qatar, UAE, Jordan, Lebanon. Are these countries going to get drawn into this conflict as well? Is this thing going to radiate outwards?
Absolutely, because bear in mind, I mean, Lebanon is already shattered, and it has an experience of a civil war. Jordan has up to now survived, but it's been incredibly difficult. And the fear must be that as the whole Middle East spirals down, Jordan, which is a small country, will just be sucked in, and that we'll see the sort of general chaos there begin to spread to Jordan. And these little countries, well, Qatar, the Gulf states, these small Gulf states, they're not by themselves strong enough to affect any real change in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, as the Yemen war has exposed, has a very highly developed intelligence apparatus, but its military is simply not fit for purpose. So they are hampered to the extent that they can interfere. And, you know, it could very well be the three big powers will be Turkey, Iran and Egypt. Those will probably be the ones that will contest things. The Russians will to some extent hold the ring because they're present in Syria. They have a base there. They have, in fact, a large number of bases in Syria. Their priority will be to keep Syria intact, but I doubt they will want to try and control the whole Middle East. And, of course, the Israelis will feel increasingly insecure, and that will make them take ever more radical steps to protect themselves because of the general insecurity that will now happen. So the problem is the United States has created chaos. It's leaving chaos behind it as it gradually edges out. And that chaos has extremely frightening consequences for everybody involved. And I think this event that we're seeing at the moment is a precursor of what is to come. Now, on the conflict itself, always in all conflicts there is the possibility of negotiation. Frankly, I see no sign of that or willingness on any party's side, either within the conflict in Israel or generally in the Middle East, of anybody to sit down and talk things through. If you're talking about Israelis and Palestinians, they've been arguing for decades. If you're talking about Syria, there is no sign of any negotiated situation to the conflict in Syria. There have been talks in Geneva, there have been talks in Astana, in Kazakhstan. They've not led anywhere. And the same goes for Yemen. What tends to happen in the Middle East is that the strongest wins, and the weak lose out, and the poor and the weak suffer.
Very quick question. Security Council, UN, or just a no-show? Forget about them.
Absolutely, I think forget about them is the answer. I mean, if you have a big power like the United States, a superpower like the United States that is able to sort of enlist support on the Security Council, come up with resolutions, and then use its power to enforce those resolutions, well, then the Security Council at the UN has some purpose. But in the absence of such a power, I mean, frankly, it becomes meaningless. The UN Security Council has produced any number of resolutions about the situation in the Middle East. I mean, remember, Resolution 242, going all the way back to 1967, which was supposed to provide the roadmap towards peace. Nobody talks about it anymore. I mean, it's almost forgotten. And that is the general fact of UN Security Council resolutions if they don't have the might of a great power behind them.
All right. Tough story to analyze because we just don't know where it's going to go. Very unpredictable, very chaotic.
We don't know where to go. But I'm going to just finish with this. If the United States retreats in the Middle East, well, maybe it must, maybe it should. But it does have some kind of obligation in that case to try to leave some kind of order behind it. And that means brokering negotiations between various groups and conflicts and trying to do some genuine diplomacy and institution building. What we're getting instead is nothing. And that's the most worrying thing of all. I mean, another administration in an earlier time would, I think, have made some serious effort to leave something behind that could run the picture in the absence of the US. But this administration, it's an absolute blank. It's a zero. And that is the most scary thing of all. It's like the story of the Romans quitting Britain. They quit Britain and the whole place simply broke down because they left nothing behind them. And that's how it feels with the US in the Middle East under this administration.
Yeah, we don't even have any indications how they're going to leave, if they're going to leave. I mean, once again, we're speculating that they're going to leave the Middle East, which is great. Exactly. Get out of the Middle East, but at least create some sort of roadmaps and some sort of plans that we're leaving at this time in this way, and we're going to broker these deals.
Exactly.
And we're not going to leave the place in shambles. It just seems like they're just leaving they're just out. It seems, but they're not announcing it one way or another. Exactly. They're just just pure drift.
They're not they're not even clear in their own minds what they're going to do. I mean, why isn't Blinken going to Jerusalem? Why isn't Sullivan, who's the national security advisor, why is he not going to Jerusalem? Why aren't they touring the Middle East, talking to people, doing all of these things? They're not. As I said, Biden took weeks before he picked up the phone to talk to Netanyahu. They're not interested in any of this. And they don't even have a plan. They don't have a policy. Even the Afghan pull-out policy, which, to be very clear, I support. They basically stumbled into that when they ran out of other options of what to do. They haven't, this isn't something that, they sat down to themselves and said, right, these are the steps we need to take. What do we need to do to make them effective? As you absolutely rightly said, it's pure drift.
It's called an exit strategy. You use it in life, you use it in business, you use it in geopolitics. An exit strategy, for God's sakes.
Correct. Exactly right.
All right, we'll leave it there. Look for us on Odyssey, on BitChute, on SuperU, and on Locals. We are posting there every day, and we're doing exclusive videos on those platforms as well. And go to the Duran shop, 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS. Everything on the Duran shop, 10% off. Take care.